Harold Jennings never thought love would come for him again. Not at 63. Not with his joints aching every morning and the silence of widowhood hanging heavy over his modest brick house on Sycamore Lane. His life had settled into a quiet rhythm. Feed the dog, walk 2 laps around the neighborhood, sip black coffee at Maggie's diner while reading yesterday's paper. Some mornings he didn't say a word to anyone, and that was just fine by him. But life, as Harold would later tell detectives in a frail voice barely above a whisper, has a way of slipping in through the back door when you're not looking. He met her on a Tuesday. He remembered the weather. Overcast, drizzly, the kind of southern afternoon where the humidity felt like an extra layer of skin. He had ducked in a Page and Pen, the only bookstore still standing in Millstone, to find an old war memoir he'd lent to a neighbor years ago and never got back. That's when he saw her, standing in the psychology section, spine slightly curved, dark hair falling across one cheek. She wasn't reading so much as staring at the book in her hand, lips barely moving, as if mouthing silent answers to invisible questions. She turned to him like she already knew he was watching and said, "Do you ever wonder what people are hiding behind their smiles?" Her voice wasn't flirtatious. It was precise, surgical, like someone who had long ago learned that language could be a scalpel. Harold blinked and chuckled out of reflex, but something in her eyes stopped the smile from reaching his face. "All the time," he replied. That was all it took. A fissure in the routine. A crack in the armor he didn't realize he still wore. Her name was Elena. Elena Marquez. She looked early 30s, maybe younger. Too young for him, Harold thought, but he couldn't walk away. There was a sadness to her, yes, but also something else, something that pulled him in like gravity in a dark room. She spoke in questions more than answers, smiled like it was a secret she wasn't sure you were ready to hear. Her touch was light but purposeful, like she wasn't testing the waters. She was claiming territory. By Friday, they had dinner at her place. A tiny yellow rental tucked at the edge of Old Forest Road. Mismatched candles. Jazz on a dusty speaker. Homemade chili she served in chip bowls, like it was a ritual, not a meal. She told him she was a writer, freelance, mostly psychology and fringe science. "I like broken men," she had said that night, spoon halfway to her mouth. Harold didn't ask what she meant. He didn't want to. Some part of him knew he was already falling, or maybe sinking. They kissed for the first time under the kitchen light. Slow, lingering, like they had nowhere else to be. And for the first time in years, Harold felt something awaken in his chest. Not lust, not exactly, but the kind of warmth that makes you forget how cold you'd been for so long. They didn't date like normal couples. No movie nights. No picnics. No Sunday drives. It was always late nights, low lights, whispers under breath. Sometimes she'd call him past midnight. "I can't sleep unless you're here," she'd whisper. And Harold, dear lonely Harold, would pull on his shoes and drive, no matter how tired he was, like a moth drawn to the flame, or the blade. There was something about her place, something that smelled faintly like incense and bleach, like the walls had absorbed both prayer and chemical warfare. He never asked. He didn't want to break the spell. She had this phrase she whispered whenever they made love, just as she wrapped her arms around him like ivy, "Let me in." And he did. Again, and again, and again. Looking back, Harold couldn't remember when a strange thing started. Maybe it was the night he noticed her door at the end of the hall was always locked. He asked once. She smiled, pressed her finger to his lips, and said, "Everyone's got a room like that. Some of us just keep the key." He let it go. But the night he found the envelope was different. Elena was in the shower, humming something soft and indecipherable. Harold went to grab a beer and opened the wrong drawer. Inside was an envelope, unsealed. Curious, he peeked. Inside was a Polaroid, old, faded. Elena stood next to a man in a white coat. Behind them was a chalkboard filled with chemical symbols. A lab, definitely. She was wearing the same locket she always wore now. The man next to her wasn't smiling. His eyes looked afraid. Harold slid the photo back in the envelope and closed the drawer. But that night, she touched him more tenderly than usual. She whispered things he didn't understand. "I've been waiting for someone like you," she said. "Someone who doesn't flinch." He didn't sleep. Not really. He told himself it was the bourbon, the late nights, the loneliness catching up to him. But he knew, deep down, in the part of the soul we try to keep silent, he knew something was wrong with Elena. But by then, it was already too late. And in the weeks to come, Harold Jennings would come to understand a horrifying truth. Sometimes when someone says, "Let me in," they don't plan to ever leave. Harold Jennings had always thought of his body as a stubborn old machine, slow to start, creaky in the joints, but still dependable. He mowed his own lawn, lifted his own groceries, even fixed the occasional carburetor in the garage. But after just a few weeks with Elena, that body began to betray him. It started subtly, a dull ache behind his eyes, a sour taste in the back of his throat. One morning, while brushing his teeth, he noticed blood in the sink. Just a little, just pink. He spat again more. His gums throbbed. He ran his tongue along the inside of his cheek and winced. There were sores he didn't remember having the day before. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when he caught the smell. He was in the shower. The steam clung to his aging skin like fog on a window pane. He leaned into the stream, letting it pound against his back, and for a moment, everything felt normal, until he inhaled. A sharp, metallic scent hit him. Sweet but wrong, like spoiled fruit soaked in rust. At first, he thought it was the drain. Maybe mildew. Maybe something in the pipes. But then he lifted his arm to wash and caught it again, stronger this time, coming from him. "Jesus," he whispered, gagging. He turned off the water, stepped out, and examined himself in the mirror. His skin looked fine. No bruises. No rashes. But he didn't feel fine. He felt like something inside him was unraveling. Like his bones were being scraped hollow, cell by cell. Later that night, Elena called. Her voice on the phone was syrupy, sleepy, seductive. "Where have you been hiding, old man?" she purred. "Don't tell me you're already sick of me." He cleared his throat, just feeling under the weather, maybe coming down with something. "You should let me take care of you," she whispered. "I've got all kinds of remedies." The way she said it made his stomach twist. Still, he went. He always went. But something was shifting between them. Elena didn't touch him the same way anymore. Her eyes lingered a little longer after they made love, like she was waiting for something to bloom beneath his skin. Like he was an experiment, not a partner. The next morning, he found the veins on his chest had darkened. Not blue, not bruised, more like gray, faded, sick. His breath, no matter how much mouthwash he used, stank of rot. Even Sarge, his loyal golden retriever of 13 years, refused to come near him. That hurt more than anything else. At the clinic in town, Dr. Marlene Bishop took one look at him and blanched. "You're not okay," she said flatly. "You're coming in for blood work." Now, she ran a full panel. Liver, kidneys, white cells, everything. She poked and prodded and scanned until Harold felt like a cadaver on a table. Hours later, she walked into the room with a face that looked carved out of stone. "What the hell have you been into?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean your body is shutting down, and not in the way it's supposed to. You've got tissue damage, stomach lining, liver, intestines. It's like you've been poisoned." Harold's head spun. "Poisoned? By what?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I'm sending your toxicology panel to Nashville, and I want you to promise me something right now. Stay away from whoever you've been sleeping with." The word landed like a punch. Elena. He didn't say her name. Not yet. Not out loud. But in his mind, the pieces started to form a terrible picture. The locked room, the Polaroid, the strange scent on her skin, the phrase she whispered every night. let me in. When he got home, he sat on the edge of his bed for over an hour. He didn't take off his coat, didn't move. He could still feel her on him, smell her on his hands. His mind screamed at him to call the police. But his heart, a fool's heart, still longed for the warmth of her voice. That night, Harold collapsed. He had made it as far as the kitchen, was reaching for a glass of water, and then the world spun sideways. His body hit the floor with a thud that echoed through the empty house. He lay there, half conscious, his breath shallow, skin cold and clammy, mouth frothing faintly. When the EMTs found him, they thought he was already dead. But he wasn't. Not yet. As they wheeled him into the ER, he stirred, eyes fluttering open for one fleeting second. And from his dry, cracked lips, 2 final words escaped before the coma swallowed him whole. Something's wrong with her. And with that, Harold Jennings disappeared into the dark. But Elena? She had only just begun. Harold Jennings lay comatose beneath the cold, humming lights of the Harrison County Medical Center, his body hooked up to machines that beeped and pumped and pushed his failing organs to hang on just a little longer. His skin had turned a sickly gray, almost translucent in places. Veins spidered across his chest in unnatural patterns, thin, web-like filaments that seemed to shimmer under fluorescent light. His breath, when it came, was shallow and wet, like something decaying beneath the surface of a pond. Dr. Marlene Bishop stood at the foot of his bed, jaw clenched, staring at the chart in her hands with growing dread. This wasn't illness. This wasn't cancer or infection or age. Harold Jennings was decomposing, slowly, from the inside out, and no one could explain how or why. She picked up the phone. "This is Bishop," she said tightly. "Give me Detective Rebecca Colton. Tell her it's urgent." When Rebecca Colton arrived, she didn't bother with her badge. She walked straight into the hospital room like a woman who'd seen too many things and believed in coincidence far too little. At 61, she carried herself with the quiet exhaustion of a former federal agent who'd left Washington for Tennessee in search of peace and found only different kinds of chaos. "This the man?" she asked quietly. Bishop nodded. "Harold Jennings. Retired mechanic. No criminal record. No history of drug use. No enemies. And now this." Rebecca studied the man lying before her. He didn't look injured. He looked empty, like the life had been gently siphoned out of him, one breath at a time. He mentioned a name before he went under. Bishop added, said, "Something's wrong with her." Colton scribbled in her notebook. "Her name?" He didn't say, but I ran his call history before he got here. One number comes up again and again the past few weeks. Elena Marquez. Paid in cash. No address listed. Only ever called him. Never texted. Never emailed. That was all Colton needed. 6 hours later, she stood in front of a mustard yellow rental on Old Forest Road, a place that looked like it hadn't been cleaned or cared for in weeks. The curtains were drawn. The lawn was overgrown. No movement. The mailbox still bore the name E. Marquez, but the trail had already begun to rot, just like Harold. With a search warrant in hand and her partner waiting outside, Rebecca kicked the door in. The house was wrong. Not messy, not violent, just wrong. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and bleach. Wine bottles with melted candles were lined along the mantel like makeshift altars. Books on neurobiology and psychopharmacology were scattered across the coffee table, dog-eared and annotated in tiny, obsessive handwriting. On the kitchen counter sat a half-empty bottle of absinthe and a single red apple, untouched. Rebecca moved through the house slowly, hand hovering near her sidearm. Then she found the door, into the hallway. Heavy, reinforced, locked from the outside. She called in her partner. Together, they forced it open. What they found was not a bedroom. It was a lab, crude, improvised, but undeniably intentional. A small humming fridge in the corner marked BIO in red Sharpie. Glass vials labeled with letters and numbers. Surgical gloves. Latex sheets. A microscope. Chalkboard equations covering the wall. Chemical symbols. Enzyme pathways. Graphs tracking decay curve response in mammalian subjects. And then the photographs. 3, taped side by side above the fridge. Each was a man. Each appeared pale, sick, emaciated. And one of them was Harold Jennings. "Oh, Jesus Christ," her partner muttered. "What the hell is this woman?" Rebecca said nothing. She walked over to the fridge, opened it slowly, and stared. Inside were 3 glass vials filled with a faint pink liquid. One was labeled Batch D. Harold's batch. She felt her stomach turn. On the far side of the room, hidden behind a collapsed bookshelf, was an old picture frame. Inside was a folded discharge form, Federal Psychiatric Facility, closed in 2016. The patient, Delilah Vargas, diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive traits, delusional identity fixation, unfit for trial. Also known by her alias, Elena Marquez. Back at the station, Rebecca pieced it together in silence. Delilah had been institutionalized after allegedly poisoning a college professor with an untraceable compound. No charges were filed. He survived, but refused to testify. Rumors swirled of an inappropriate relationship, threats, psychological manipulation. Eventually, she disappeared, released into the world with a new name and a sealed record. And now here she was, in Millstone, reborn. And Harold Jennings was just her latest host. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? A host, a body, a living container for something engineered, designed, measured. Rebecca stared at the photo of Harold taken 2 days ago, skin graying, lips cracked, teeth bleeding at the root. The body was fighting itself and losing. This wasn't sex. This was invasion. This wasn't heartbreak. It was biological warfare. Rebecca placed a photo of Harold beside the other 2 dead men from Kentucky and Georgia, both listed in old missing persons cases. Both had reportedly been dating a woman with black hair, dark eyes, and a hypnotic voice. One died of acute systemic organ failure. The other, idiopathic internal necrosis. No poison found. No foul play confirmed. Until now, no one had made the connection. But Rebecca saw it clearly. Delilah Vargas, Elena Marquez, whatever name she wore now, wasn't just seducing men. She was testing them, tuning something, perfecting it. And Harold Jennings? He wasn't the first, but he just might be the first to survive long enough to tell the world. Rebecca Colton had been in hundreds of crime scenes in her 30-year career. Blood-soaked motel rooms, basements with chains, bedrooms where death hung like perfume. But nothing unnerved her quite like that locked room at the end of Elena Marquez's hallway. It wasn't what was there that frightened her. It was the precision of it, the intent. This wasn't a mess of madness. It was organized, ritualistic, scientific. The room was cool, even though the rest of the house felt muggy and still. The only sound came from a small fridge in the corner, humming low like a warning. A whiteboard stretched across one wall, covered in symbols, pathways, and enzyme chains that looked more like a mad chemist's prayer than a science lesson. Taped to the glass was a single word in red ink, written like a heading. Integration. Colton walked past the fridge first, kneeling in front of it with slow, deliberate hands. 3 vials sat in a plastic rack, faint pink liquids inside. One was labeled Batch A, another Batch C, and the third, Batch D. A line of sweat trickled down her neck as she realized what D stood for. Harold Jennings. She snapped a photo before gently placing the vial into an evidence bag. Her gloves crinkled. Her chest tightened. She didn't say a word. Behind the fridge was a corkboard with dozens of Polaroids. Some were candid shots, men smiling, shirtless, in kitchens or driveways. Others were clinical, faces drained of color, dark circles under hollow eyes. Most of them looked dead already. And at the bottom corner, held in place with a thumbtack, was a photo of Harold. His eyes were glassy, his mouth slightly open. Someone had written a date beneath it in smudged ink. The day he collapsed. Her partner, Detective Knox, entered with a low whistle. "This ain't just some twisted sex game," he muttered. "This is research." "No," Colton said. "It's a thesis. She's proving something." On the floor beneath the desk, they found a leather-bound notebook, stained and torn. Inside, hundreds of pages of obsessive entries. Handwritten logs documenting the effects of each enzyme batch on various men. Blood pressure drops, white cell activity, digestive system responses, each man reduced to data points. One entry caught her eye. Subject D shows unusual resistance. Internal decay delayed by approximate 9 hours. Possible genetic variants. Emotional bond appears stronger. Note increased cortisol during final session. Repeat exposure successful. Intimacy remains primary vector. Body integration nearing threshold. "Let me in." Colton's stomach twisted. "Let me in." That's what Harold had said, she whispered. Over and over. Like a command. A trigger. She flipped another page. This one was different. Scrawled messily. Almost like a stream of consciousness. "They never wanted my mind. Only my body. So I put my mind inside the body. They carried me. They carry me still. Even in death, they hold me. I am not a woman. I'm an idea." Colton stepped back, nearly knocking over a candle that had melted into the floor. They had all missed it. The earlier victims, the doctors, the townspeople, even Harold himself. None of them understood what Delilah Vargas had become. She wasn't killing out of anger. She wasn't killing out of lust. She was inhabiting, infecting. Elena Marquez was only the skin. The locked door had been more than physical. It was metaphorical. A boundary between the illusion and the truth. Between the woman and the weapon. Colton stood frozen as she noticed something else. A mirror, cracked and dusty, leaned against the far wall. Scratched into the glass with the tip of something sharp were the words, "I'm still inside him." Her blood ran cold. Forensics swept the room. Every inch. Swabs. Fingerprints. DNA samples. The biohazard team arrived in hazmat suits. Even they looked unnerved. As the evidence piled up, Colton returned to her office with a box of files and one burning question. How long had this been going on? The answer came 2 days later. A medical examiner from Georgia called to report 2 unsolved deaths from 3 years earlier. Men in their 30s. Both healthy. Both deteriorated rapidly. Cause of death? Inconclusive. But blood work from one case had recently been reanalyzed. Enzyme activity mimicked a pathogen, but no pathogen found. Colton requested the autopsy photos. One of the men, blonde, lean, hazel-eyed, had a necklace in his hand when he died. A silver locket, identical to the one Elena wore in every photo. Delilah Vargas, Elena, whatever she called herself, had been perfecting this for years. Colton pored over case files all night. She compared journal entries, matched handwriting, cross-referenced patient files from the federal mental facility in Missouri where Delilah had been institutionalized at age 15. The early records were chilling. Delilah demonstrates detachment from physical form, refers to body as a shell. Patient believes emotions can be chemically induced, shows desire to merge with others without physical destruction. One therapist had made note, Delilah is not interested in power. She's interested in permanence. Colton sat back in her chair, staring at Harold's photo. He was in a coma now, breathing through tubes, organs failing, but technically alive. And yet, not alone. She looked at the evidence bags again, the vials, the locket, the notebook, and felt it in her gut. Delilah hadn't wanted to kill Harold. She had wanted to stay with him. Forever. The locked door was never to keep people out. It was to keep her in, and now that door was open, and she was gone. They found her in Arkansas 3 weeks after Harold Jennings slipped into his coma. Delilah Vargas, still going by the name Elena Marquez, was sitting cross-legged in a vacant farmhouse just outside Little Rock, surrounded by flickering tea candles and the low hiss of an old cassette player looping a child's lullaby. She didn't run. She didn't scream. When SWAT officers burst through the door, guns drawn and adrenaline high, she merely lifted her gaze and smiled. "I thought you'd come sooner," she said calmly, almost disappointed. Detective Rebecca Colton entered last. She crouched in front of Delilah, studying her closely, eyes scanning every subtle shift of expression. Up close, Delilah didn't look like a murderer. She didn't even look dangerous. She looked serene, empty, like something had long since left the building but hadn't bothered to close the door behind it. "You killed Harold Jennings," Colton said quietly. Delilah tilted her head. "Did I? He let me in. You poisoned him." "No," she whispered, leaning in, voice like silk sliding over glass. "I became him." That statement would echo across America in the weeks to come. Headlines screamed it. Podcasts dissected it. Late-night hosts mocked it. But in the courtroom, in the raw, hushed tension of the trial that followed, no one was laughing. The media branded it the seduction virus trial. They camped outside the Harrison County Courthouse in vans with satellite dishes and telescopic lenses. Cable shows aired dramatized reenactments. A best-selling book deal was inked before jury selection even began. There were rumors Netflix had already bought the rights. But inside the courtroom, the mood was cold, clinical. Walter Jennings was still alive, barely, too weak to testify. But his presence loomed over every word, every exhibit, every photo projected on the courtroom screen. He had become the body that couldn't lie, the evidence that breathed. The prosecution opened with science. Dr. Marlene Bishop took the stand first, walking the jury through Walter's deterioration like a guided tour through hell. Necrotized tissue, collapsed organs, internal ulcers that opened like mouths inside his gut. The jury squirmed. A woman in the second row wept silently. "This was not a virus," Dr. Bishop said. "This was engineered. The enzyme found in Walter's blood didn't exist in nature. It was synthetic, part bacterial mimic, part protein-based carrier. It didn't kill on contact. It rewrote the body slowly, subtly, irreversibly, and it had been administered through sexual contact repeatedly. Could this have been accidental?" The defense asked. "No," Bishop replied. "This was deliberate, designed, maintained." Next came the forensics. Chemical compounds matched across 3 dead men from different states, all linked to women matching Delilah's description. In her rented house, the vials labeled batch C, and batch D all matched enzyme traces found in their bodies. Batch D was Harold. The prosecution then introduced the lab journal, Delilah's handwritten notes, cataloging the decay of each man as if she were fine-tuning an instrument. One entry simply read, "He doesn't know. I'm already inside. He only feels the heat. But the changes have begun." Then came a bombshell. Detective Colton was called to testify. She spoke clearly, plainly. No theatrics, no grandstanding. She told the jury how she discovered the room at the end of the hallway. The vials, the whiteboard equations, the photos. She showed them the mirror where Delilah had etched the phrase, "I'm still inside him." "Did you find evidence of intent?" the prosecutor asked. Colton didn't blink. Absolutely. She documented every man, monitored his symptoms, adjusted her methods. She wasn't experimenting on them. She was inhabiting them. The defense scrambled. They claimed mental illness. That Delilah, diagnosed with borderline traits and delusional thinking at age 15, lacked the capacity to form intent. That her actions were the result of unresolved childhood trauma, not malice. But Delilah dismantled that argument herself. When asked if she wanted to make a statement before sentencing, she stood slowly, chains clinking, spine straight. The courtroom fell silent. "They only ever saw my body," she said, eyes sweeping across the jury. "They never asked who I was. Never cared. So I stopped asking too. I made myself unforgettable." Her voice was calm, not remorseful, not angry, certain. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was trying to live in them. The mind dies. The body dies. But memory? Memory lives. And now, I do too, gasps. Someone in the gallery whispered, "She's insane." But Colton knew better. She wasn't insane. She was convinced. The judge, a Vietnam veteran turned district court hardliner, leaned forward, his voice like gravel. "Ms. Vargas," he said, "you are not some misunderstood genius. You are a predator, a bioterrorist, and you used human connection as your weapon." He paused, letting silence settle. "You are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel cracked. The crowd erupted. Outside, rain began to fall. Reporters shouted questions. Protesters clashed, some holding signs that read, "She was built, not born," while others screamed, "No parole for parasites." Inside, Colton stood still, watching Delilah being led away. Delilah didn't look back. She didn't need to, because behind her, lying a hospital bed under the weight of tubes and machines, Harold Jennings still lived. And inside him, so did she. 2 months after Delilah Vargas was sentenced to life without parole, the story should have ended. The courtroom had been cleared. The reporters had moved on. The podcast specials had aired, dissected, and faded. Harold Jennings was still alive, still in recovery, still waking some nights with sweat-soaked sheets and the ghost of her breath in his ear. But the public believed the nightmare was over. Evil had a face, and it was now behind reinforced glass and concrete walls. Then a plain brown envelope arrived at the Harrison County Police Department. No return address, no postmark. Hand-delivered by a teenager in a blue hoodie who walked in, asked for Detective Rebecca Colton by name, and left before anyone could ask a question. Inside the envelope was a single Polaroid photo. A man, mid-30s, lay in a hospital bed, eyes vacant, lips cracked, skin pale with gray blotches spreading across his collarbone, tubes in his nose, IVs in both arms. His body looked eerily familiar. Not just sick, failing. The kind of systemic collapse that Colton had only seen once before. Taped to the bottom of the photo was a note, handwritten in shaky script. "It's happening again." Colton's hands went still. The man's name was Brandon L. Reyes. The attached medical report was from Riverside General Hospital in New Mexico. His symptoms matched Harold's almost identically. Unexplained organ decay, ulcerations, immune system failure. No poisons detected. No viral or bacterial markers. It was like his body had given up on being alive. The report listed his emergency contact, a girlfriend named Elena Vale. Colton's heart stopped. The name wasn't just similar. It was deliberate. She picked up the phone and called a favor in to the FBI. 48 hours later, she had a DMV photo of Elena Vale. Different hair, blonde. Different wardrobe, glasses, smart casual. But the face, the jawline, the eyes, it wasn't Delilah Vargas. But it was someone who studied her. Someone who had mimicked her, idolized her. Someone who, in Colton's gut, felt even more dangerous. Because this woman wasn't trying to escape her past. She was building on it. That night, Colton sat at her motel room in New Mexico and spread out the evidence on the bed like puzzle pieces dipped in blood. The autopsy reports from the other two men Delilah had killed. The lab notes, the locket, the journals. Then she saw it. Every man had, at some point, either in a text message, a voicemail, or a hospital intake form, spoken a version of the same line. She told me I'd carry her forever. Colton's breath caught. At 2:14 a.m., her inbox pinged with a new email. No sender, no subject, just one attachment, a PDF. She opened it. It was a chemical formula, hand-drawn, but far more advanced than anything recovered from Delilah's lab. Complex, refined, annotated in newer handwriting. At the bottom, typed in courier font, "You think you caged the virus." But the virus was always an idea. By morning, Brandon Reyes was dead. Autopsy, inconclusive. No poison, no virus, just cellular collapse. Internal organs failing as if the body had rejected itself. Elena Vale, his girlfriend, was gone. Her apartment had been cleared out. No prints, no DNA. The only clue left behind was written in condensation on the bathroom mirror. Batch Z was always meant to evolve. Colton returned to Tennessee with a storm in her chest. She reopened the sealed Granger file, placed Brandon Reyes's photo beside Harold's, and stared. The similarities were too perfect. Same pattern, same destruction, same seduction. Only this time, it wasn't Delilah. Or maybe it was. The possibility that Delilah had created a successor, a disciple, sank into her like ice water. She pulled out the photo of Elena Vale again, pinned it to the board next to Delilah's mugshot, circled both in red ink, and wrote one word beneath. Inheritance. Because now she understood. Delilah hadn't just created a method. She created a movement. Somewhere out there, in dimly lit rooms and hidden forums and lockdown research labs, someone had picked up where Delilah left off. Someone who believed in the fusion of flesh and memory. Someone who saw the body not as sacred, but as a tool. And that someone had taken the idea further. The original virus, the enzyme, was deadly. But the ideology was immortal. Back in Clearwater Federal Correctional Facility, Delilah Vargas sat alone in her isolation cell. She hadn't spoken in weeks. Not to guards. Not to therapists. Not even during mandated evaluations. But something about her made the staff nervous. They'd find things. Small, inexplicable things. Rust scraped from metal vents. Napkins folded into strange geometric shapes. Hair wrapped tightly into little knots. A smear of something red beneath the toilet rim. When asked why she wasn't sleeping, she'd smile and say, "I'm fermenting." One psychiatric nurse wrote in her report, "She doesn't act like a prisoner. She acts like an incubator." In a routine sweep of her cell, a guard found a torn piece of paper hidden beneath the mattress. It was scrawled in blood and ink. The message read, "If they carry me in their bodies, then I'm already free." Rebecca Colton stared at that message for a long time. She didn't sleep that night, because the real horror wasn't Delilah's crimes. The real horror was that somewhere, someone believed she hadn't gone far enough, and they were ready to finish what she started. Harold Jennings opened his eyes on a Monday morning in March. No one expected him to. The nurses had been instructed to prepare for end-of-life care. Dr. Marlene Bishop had already updated his medical directive with the family attorney. His vitals had flatlined twice in the past month. His kidneys were functioning at half capacity. His intestines were scarred like paper set too close to flame. At one point, someone had suggested quietly, not cruelly, but with clinical mercy, that maybe letting go would be kinder than dragging out the inevitable. And yet, Harold gasped, choked, blinked, not dramatically, not like in the movies. He simply came back. His first few hours awake were spent in a blur of fluorescent lights, whispered prayers, and slow 4 drips. He couldn't speak. His throat was raw, his mouth filled with ulcers, but his eyes were alert, present. He squeezed the nurse's hand when she asked if he knew where he was. He nodded when Dr. Bishop whispered, "Do you know who did this to you?" A single tear rolled down his cheek. News of his awakening tore through Millstone like wildfire and dry wind. The man who'd been at the center of the country's most bizarre and chilling trial was alive. Reporters tried sneaking into the hospital. Talk show hosts speculated whether he'd testify before Congress. Online forums called him the man who lived. But Harold didn't care about any of that. He was just trying to breathe. Detective Rebecca Colton visited that afternoon. She didn't bring her notepad. Didn't need it. She found Harold propped up with pillows, tubes still running from his arms, his skin pale as linen, his body thinner than she remembered. But his eyes were clear and haunted. "You've been through hell," she said gently, pulling up a chair. Harold tried to smile. It came out crooked, fragile. "She said she loved me." Colton looked down, swallowed hard. "She said that to all of them." "No," he whispered. "It was different with me." She didn't argue. Not because she believed him, but because she understood what he needed to believe. "You're the only one who survived," she said. "You're the proof. The reason she's never getting out." Harold looked away, jaw tightening. I should have known something was wrong. The way she looked at me, like I was a project, like I was something she built, not someone she loved. Colton nodded slowly. "That's what you were to her. A trial. Vashti." He flinched, shut his eyes. A single breath rattled in his chest. "She never hurt me with violence," he whispered. "She made me want her." And that, Rebecca realized, was the most brutal cut of all. Not the enzyme, not the ulcers, the trust. The intimacy turned inside out. Because Harold hadn't been attacked. He had been embraced. And that embrace had nearly killed him. He stayed in the hospital 2 more weeks. Recovery was slow, painful, complicated. His immune system would never fully recover. His liver was permanently damaged. He'd need a strict regimen of medication for the rest of his life. And even then, the doctors weren't sure how much time he had. But it wasn't the physical pain that kept him up at night. It was her voice. "Let me in." It came to him in dreams, sometimes so softly it sounded like wind. Other times, it was right beside him, a whisper against his cheek. On one occasion, he tore the sheets off himself, convinced something was inside him still, burrowing, infecting, claiming. Dr. Bishop called it residual cellular trauma. Harold called it something else. "A piece of her's still in me," he told Rebecca one morning as she drove him back to his house. Not in the blood, not in the tissue, deeper than that. The house was exactly as he'd left it, quiet, tidy, dim. His dog, Sarge, had been staying with a neighbor. When he saw Harold, he barked once, paused, and then launched himself into his master's arms. Harold wept into the dog's fur. Rebecca stepped onto the porch, giving him space. "You know," she said quietly, "some people are already calling you a miracle." Harold chuckled, hoarse and broken. "Feels more like a curse." "You're alive." "Yeah," he said, eyes distant. "But for what?" She looked at him, really looked, to remind the rest of us what evil looks like when it wears perfume instead of a mask. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. Over the next few weeks, Harold tried to rebuild a routine. He returned to Maggie's diner, sat in the back booth with the same coffee and half a muffin. People stared. Some offered condolences. Others offered silence. He preferred the latter. And then one morning, she appeared. Not her, not Delilah, but someone new. Lorraine Kelly. Early 60s. Widow. Former nurse. Laughed with her shoulders. Wore a green cardigan that didn't match but didn't care. She sat 2 booths over, always beneath the old jukebox that hadn't played anything recorded after 1975. She didn't look at him like he was a headline. She looked at him like he was still human. and slowly, cautiously, Harold started to speak to her. About weather. Local football. Her opinion on smartphones? Horrible, she said with conviction. She baked him lemon muffins. He fixed her porch light. One Sunday, she reached for his hand during a walk. Just that. A soft, innocent gesture. Harold froze. His palm went cold. His chest twisted. He pulled away. Lorraine looked at him. Not hurt, just puzzled. I'm not her, she said gently. He couldn't respond. Couldn't breathe. I know what she did to you. Everyone in this town does. But I'm not here to steal anything from you. Least of all your peace. That night, he stared at himself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. He looked like himself, but he didn't feel like himself. He opened the medicine cabinet. The pills, the creams, the scar on his chest from his central line. And then, as if conjured by memory alone, he heard her again. Let me in. He slammed the cabinet shut. The next morning, he left a note in Lorraine's mailbox. One line. You deserve a man whose soul isn't still bruising. She never responded. Didn't need to. 2 weeks later, he saw her downtown, walking beside a man in a denim jacket, older, kind-looking. He didn't feel jealousy. He felt relief and grief, because Harold Jennings wasn't afraid of loving again. He was afraid that some part of her was still inside him, waiting to twist that love into another kind of death. Winter came early to Millstone. The leaves turned brittle before they had the chance to blush, and a sharp wind moved through the town like a whisper everyone was trying to ignore. Harold Jennings sat on his porch most mornings now, wrapped in a flannel blanket, Sarge curled loyally at his feet. The coffee in his thermos often went cold before he touched it. He didn't mind. He wasn't drinking for the warmth anymore. He was drinking for the weight of it in his hands, something solid in a world that still felt like vapor. 6 months had passed since Delilah Vargas, Elena Marquez, was sentenced to life without parole. 6 months since Harold had awoken in that hospital bed, muscles wasted, soul bruised. The town had tried to move on, but evil doesn't just disappear. It lingers. It calcifies. And in Harold's case, it sometimes smelled like lilac and bleach, even after sheets were changed for the 4th time. Detective Rebecca Colton still visited him once a week, sometimes with pie, sometimes just with silence. She never asked how he was doing. She didn't need to. The answer clung to everything he did, from the way he walked like his ribs had been hollowed out, to the way his eyes flinched at the sound of glass breaking. Trauma, she had learned long ago, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just hums. That night, she brought a small box. Something I thought you should have, she said, setting it down beside his untouched coffee. Harold opened it. Inside was the silver locket, the one Delilah had worn in every photo, the one he had touched once, absent-mindedly, while she lay beside him. They took it off her during intake, Rebecca explained. She asked for it back. Harold didn't speak. He lifted it into the porch light, watching the chain catch the last pink sliver of sunset. It looked so delicate, it had nearly killed him. She used to say, he murmured, that letting someone into your body is the same as letting them into your soul. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her badge glinting under the porch bulb. That, she said, might be the most dangerous thing she ever believed. They sat there as the sun vanished completely and the wind picked up. In the distance, the church bell rang 9 times. Harold closed the box, set it gently beside his coffee, and for the first time since his release from the hospital, he drank. It was bitter and hot and real. That night, he dreamed. He was back in the yellow house off Old Forest Road. But everything was cast in red, as if the walls had been dipped in blood and sealed in amber. The air was thick, sweet, rotten. The hallway pulsed. The floor beneath his feet breathed like flesh. Delilah stood at the end of the corridor, wearing the white cotton gown from the night of her arrest. Her hair, floated around her face like it was underwater. Her smile was warm. Too warm. "You came back," she said. Harold didn't speak. "You used to want me here," she whispered, stepping forward. "You let me in. You begged me to stay." He shook his head. "Just barely. I didn't know what you were." Her smile faltered just slightly. "I never lied," she said. "You just never listened. All you wanted was what I gave you." "No," Harold rasped. "I wanted you, not the poison." Delilah tilted her head, pity in her eyes. There was no difference. She reached for his hand. This time, her skin cracked where it touched him. Black veins spidered out across her wrist. Her face began to flake like ash in the wind. Her body folded inward, collapsing in slow motion. "Do you hate me?" she asked, voice thin, almost childlike. Harold looked into her eyes, those same eyes that once held mystery and now held only void. "No," he said softly, "but I'll never let you in again." The floor beneath her gave way, and she was gone. He woke up gasping, heart thundering, sheets tangled at his feet. Sarge whined beside the bed. Harold sat up, rubbed his eyes. His hands were still shaking, but they were his. Across town, in a quiet office at the Harrison County Sheriff's Department, Detective Colton sat alone. The Granger file was finally closed. Photos boxed, evidence archived. But one thing still clung to her board, a photo of Delilah, smiling in her mugshot like she knew something no one else ever would. Colton lit a cigarette, a bad habit she'd sworn off until Delilah entered her life. She didn't kill with a gun, she murmured to the empty room. Didn't use a knife, didn't even raise her voice. She touched, she smiled, she whispered, "Let me in." Colton flipped through her notebook. Harold, Stephen, Troy, Brandon, each one a name, a man, a vessel. "We're trained to look for monsters in the shadows," she whispered. "But the real ones know how to wear perfume." That should have been the end, but it wasn't. 2 weeks later, a package arrived. No name, no address, just one word on the outside, urgent. Inside, a single napkin sealed in plastic, and a strand of long, dark hair. DNA confirmed it wasn't Delilah's. Whoever she was, she had the same formula, the same belief, the same idea. Somewhere out there, a woman was still whispering to another man in the dark, "Let me in." And this time, she wasn't alone.